Hi, Nick here from Pods with Nick and James. Just a quick one before we get into this podcast. I want to say a massive thank you for the support that we've received since starting these podcasts. We thoroughly enjoy it and we look forward to creating more. If you want to have your say on any topics that we've discussed or suggest future topics, then you can do so at www.reddit.com/r/Nick and James Pods. And if you want to support us, you can do so for from as little as £1 a month, and you can do that at www.patreon.com/pods with Nick and James. Anyway, back to the podcast.
Hi, you're welcome to Pods with Nick and James. I am your co-host, James. Say hi, Nick.
Hi.
Cool. Right, so today's topic is something that's close to my own heart, but actually something, I'll be honest with you, I've let go over the years. For some reason, I really picked this theory up when I first came to faith in my early 20s. I think I was actually 20. And then, did some reading into it. But I just over the years let it go as I stopped seeing it as an absolute, or as a there are parts of this that I disagree with as well. But the theory that I'm going on about and already tripping up over is the theory of intelligent design. Which in my mind is the idea that the universe is so finely tuned, that there are so many, coincidence is the wrong word, but that there are so many details and exact details which allow for the universe to exist as it does and for life to be possible as it is, that seem to point towards the existence of a transcendent cause to the universe, which a lot of people then put down as God, and some people just see as a transcendent cause. What really surprises me is that even this theory nowadays, the annoying thing is some advocates of it are using pseudoscience, and some advocates of it are just using science. And it's frustrating to me that it's frustrating to me that there's a lot of disagreement on this topic within the scientific community, and nobody hears about it. But the more I've done research into this, the more it looks like there's actually disagreements in loads of scientific theories all the time, and none of us hear or know anything about it. This has been really enlightening for me on my own ignorance of the modern history of science, the modern history of multiple scientific findings. And it's just, it's been a pleasure to read about and to get back into. My main source has been The Case for a Creator by Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel was a atheist news reporter who did research, kept on doing research into whether God existed by speaking to a lot of high-end scientists. And despite some of the things that he found out, a lot of what he found the evidence went against his own beliefs, and eventually he ended up coming to know God himself through what he studied. What I will say, just as a quick caveat thing, is that although I believe there are things that point towards the existence of God, I wouldn't consider myself an advocate of intelligent design, simply because I still don't think you can prove the existence of God through intelligent argument, which is possibly a massive failing in myself as a Christian. But that's just how I feel about it. I think you need to have a personal experience, otherwise you're not gonna have the things that are needed to make you believe some of the things that I believe. Now, I
Yeah.
know you've done a fair amount of research into this over the years, Nick, and I also know that although we're on different sides of the fence of this, I will happily, as I sit here, freely admit that you've probably done a fair bit more research into this. What are some of my other sources would be Reasonable Faith by Dr. William Lane Craig. I'm probably going to buy this book called Icons of Evolution, and even though I disagree with the conclusions that are brought up in that book, it still seemed to have some interesting facts about scientific inquiries that are displayed in textbooks, at least in America. What is your understanding of intelligent design, and what are some of the readings that you've been doing?
Well, for me, my first introduction, shall we say, to intelligent design was I was about 9, and I went to Sunday school and was introduced to the Christian faith and the ideology of there being a creator who designed not just the earth, the sky, the plants, the animals, humans as well. And it didn't compute with my head at the time. As I grew up, I've always been quite a skeptic, but I've always been very open-minded. I almost sit there and say, convert me. That's basically been my argument with a lot of faiths that I've had conversations with. I've basically sat there and just had conversations with pastors, with missionaries, whoever, and given them the opportunity to convert me, talk to me about their faith, and bring me over to their side. Because I find myself going, there's millions of people that believe what you believe. I can't just deny the fact that might have some relevance, might have some truth. So I go, I'm not intelligent enough on my own to argue against you, despite the fact that I don't hold the same beliefs as you. So what that's done is it's allowed me to accumulate a perspective of not just one faith, but many faiths, many different perspectives of intelligent design. And then what I've also done is I've also had a real curiosity into the scientific world and the world of the unknown and the unexplainable and things like that. And all the time that you're going through that kind of research, you find yourself going, you find yourself almost asking the question, is there relevance? Is there some other part at play here? So there's always that question in the back of your mind, whether or not that's part of conditioning, part of growing up in a world where there are faiths, and when there are those faiths, you always have that open-ended question in the back of your mind, like, are we being watched? Is there a higher power, as it were? So it's difficult to really argue against. As I said, it's difficult to argue against intelligent design, but at the same time, it's not something that you can, as you said, it's not something that you can necessarily prove. unless we actually managed to find the ye olde grand workbench where it was worked upon, and found evidence with the tools and the DNA evidence and whatnot else of what was used to create said remnants and said like ancestors and planets and whatever else. There's no real way that you can actually prove it. So for those devout, I'll believe it if I see it, you're never going to believe it. But for those that look for the meaning between the lines, it's hard to deny it.
For them. Yeah,
it's hard to deny it. Some of the most intelligent people in the world throughout history have come to the conclusion that there's very good grounds for intelligent design.
Yeah, like Newton, Einstein.
Isaac Newton said this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Basically saying that the position of the stars, of the sun and the planets and the comets and everything else in our solar system, so perfectly tuned that it couldn't just be happenstance.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I know there's a famous... With these sorts of stories, it's always hard to know whether they're actually true or not, because, you know, who knows if the famous people said what they're reported to have said. But one conversation between Isaac Newton and a friend of his who was an atheist at the time, Isaac left a beautifully painted globe in his study when his friend came to visit him, and then left his friend waiting in there a couple of minutes, which even to me is like basic manipulation. Don't be doing that. Don't make your point by getting people to wait for you or whatever. But anyway, moving on. He came down and his friends asked him, "Oh, who made this? Who made this beautiful globe?" And the whole argument is incredibly trite, but Newton was just like, "Oh well, no one made it. It's just there." And then used that as a backwards and forwards between the two as a way of talking about the universe and how it must have some kind of transcendent cause. The reason why the intelligent design argument has become slightly more prevalent in today's society rather than in ancient culture is because people like Plato... Well, actually, Plato did believe that the world was created by the demiurge, but Aristotle just thought that the universe is simply infinite and eternal. And a lot of thinkers in a lot of societies have believed that. And to be fair, the universe, it may not be infinite, but I have no way of proving that it's not. It's so big that it almost might as well be. And also, although the universe I don't believe is or will be eternal, it's going to exist for such a huge amount of time beyond myself that once again, it might as well be. So it's difficult with these things, it's difficult to separate the fiction, the theory and the fact. But like for me, the reason... No, not for me, sorry. The reason why this... Back to the original point, I'm already just struggling to get my thoughts together. The reason why this school of thought has become slightly more... And the reason why I say is slightly more is because it's not, it's not in the news every single day. It's not, on the front of loads of magazines all the time. It's just there at the end of a YouTube video on biology, on a YouTube video on science in a scientific magazine. It's there. It's a thought which has occurred. The reason why this thing has come about is because things like the Big Bang Theory, the fact that the undeniable fact that the universe is expanding are well-known facts that have been taught in schools for at least I want to say 100 years at this point, but it might be less than that. I know that the idea that the universe is eternal is more difficult to deny when I can't remember the guy's first name, but when Hubble saw the Doppler shift and then looked at the number of stars which have the redshift, therefore, it's just to any other listeners who haven't heard of this before, the Doppler effect is the change in wavelength when a body that is emitting light is moving away at a certain speed. It changes the wavelength of the light that the object is emitting. Because so many stars in the night sky seem to be producing a different wavelength of light to what we would expect them to be, it is believed that they are moving away, and their speed is often calculated by a lot of people who are far more smarter than me. But since Hubble has been able to show fairly categorically that the universe is expanding, that seems to point towards the Big Bang Theory, or originally as it was called, the cosmic egg theory, the idea that the universe had a point of creation. And because of this, and because of a lot of other constants and details in nature, a lot of people look at the world and go, if things were just off, just by the tiniest amount, it would be impossible for life to exist as it does. I also have a couple of problems with this theory, but I'll tell you what, I'll bring those up in a little while, as I realise I'm already talking too much.
I've got a counter argument for that final point.
Brilliant.
Because I don't believe that. I personally don't believe that everything's so perfect just to sustain life. I believe that life will find a way in whatever circumstance.
For lack of a better way of putting it, like in. You know what? I'm sorry, mate. This isn't supposed to sound trite, but the Jurassic Park quote, "Life finds a way."
No, exactly that. It is that, right? So I mean, there's video. Look up on YouTube, right? There's videos where there's this. They put like pond water in a jar, no oxygen, seal it up, and it ends up with its own ecosystem, right? In your head, you're like, okay, there's no way of replenishing resources which are being consumed, but life finds a way of making it work within that environment. Yeah. I have no doubt that if you go to Pluto, for example, you'll find bacteria that is surviving out on Pluto. You go to Mercury, you'll find bacteria that is thriving in that environment. Because despite what we conceive as sustainable for life, it's sustainable for the life that we understand or that we've observed. And if we were to go into those environments, we wouldn't be sustainable. That's fair. That's an argument that you're not gonna be able to counter that.
Yeah, I to be fair, no, you're absolutely right. If I go to Mercury, outside of a spacesuit, I am dead.
Yep.
Very quickly.
But there are things that exist on this planet which would exist in environments that you couldn't. So even here, like you think about a cockroach, if a nuclear blast happened and there was like radioactive fallout, cockroaches would be fine.
Apparently the rats will as well, but the
Mm.
cockroaches have a higher tolerance. Yeah.
Yeah. And if that's not an example for how there's always a means for life to make its way, then you stop looking at it like, oh, it's the perfect scenario, and think about it more along the lines of, this is an abundance of life within this specific set of circumstances. But if we were observing a different set of circumstances, we would be observing a different abundance of life. And it might just be like observable in a different way. It wouldn't necessarily be humans walking around or apes swinging from trees and stuff like that. But it's a bit vague, and I understand that. Like, life is just, the thing that people misconceive is that they think of life as us. But life is just life forms of some description, even bacteria, and everything begun with bacteria. Even where we are, it all began with that. So the existence of bacteria shows the ability for life to exist. And if everything that exists within this little Goldilocks belt that we're in now has built from bacteria, the foundation was designed, in inverted commas, designed in this realm and built up from within that, and therefore exists within that and couldn't exist anywhere else. I feel like I've lost you, but
No. I think I know what you're saying. Like, if we did, it's interesting that when right, okay, so one of my things is, I don't know, I don't know if the creation story is simply allegory. A lot of the time I think that it is just allegory, because there are, like, I can't argue against microevolution. When it comes to like germs and single-celled organisms, what really surprises me is that there is a huge precursor to even single-celled organisms. And you're absolutely right. Bacteria can exist in a huge number of places. I will be surprised if it exists on Pluto or if it exists on Mercury, but by no means, I'm not going to say that it doesn't. And I'd bet a fiver on it. I wouldn't bet good money. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, yeah. I'm not gonna say, oh, if there is, I'll do this ridiculous thing, or I'll give you this thing which is going to cost me several years of my life working away in order to be able to do. Like, it's interesting for me that the chemical components to produce life, like carbon-based life, you're right, they are abundant in our solar system, but there are still, like, constants. Then this is the annoying thing, and this is where I have to just put my hands up and say ignorance, and please just bear with me. There are constancies, there are chemical constancies, energy constancies, which make even the existence of that life possible. And those constancies, even in and of themselves, are very, very specific, and they are throughout the universe. And I guess that's something which some people say points towards intelligent design, whereas other people say, well, it is that way, so it shouldn't surprise us that it is what we observe. Like, kind of just a bit of a cyclical argument, when it's just
it's like the same argument observed from the other side, right?
Yes.
So
yeah.
So you say that complexity is what denotes intelligence, intelligent design. However, the counter argument to that is that natural process and survival of the fittest kind of theology is what results with that complexity, because that complexity is necessary for survival in this like realities, I suppose, for lack of a better term, like on this planet, in order for our eye to work the way that our eye works, it's evolved through many different trial and errors into the form that we see, or we, not necessarily, that's a bad term, let's not use see when we're talking about eye. You get the idea. Whereas the counter argument to that is that the eye is such a complex biological invention that it seems impossible that that would happen out of natural evolution.
It's also interesting that people again have disagreed and used the eye as evidence for both sides of the argument.
Yeah.
When it comes to, a lot of people think that the eye generally is badly designed because of the way that the nerve ending is, means that every eye has a blind spot in it that just the brain glosses over, and every single retina sees the world upside down, which then requires a neural, which then the image is flipped in the brain, you know?
Yeah, and this is where you start to get towards the realm of almost like your brain being a computer. And this is kind of where I walk you down the road of where I sit in like my thinking.
Great, let's go for it.
I don't think that I don't think it's beyond comprehension to believe in intelligent design. Let's start from the beginning here, okay? Everything, like every faith has got a level of history that denotes that there was a creation of intelligence. And the more that you look into things like this, you start to question what's outside of the bubble, what's outside of reality. And is reality is what we see, what we experience real, or is it just exactly that? It's just experience. Bear with me here, both listeners and yourself. Just bear with me, because I am going somewhere. So hold fire.
I talk way too much. You take the mic. You do what you got to do.
Right. So think about it like this, right? Reality is consciousness. Consciousness is intelligent, and intelligence is the entity of consciousness as one organism, as one entity, knows everything. And if you think about it outside of the sphere of reality, it exists in a state of all-knowing omnipotence, much the same way as we talk about God. In a state of omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, all the omnis. But on its own, outside of this entity that its experience, it is just a library full of books with all the answers. And it's meaningless. To have all that intelligence, all of the answers, and yet no way of really experiencing what that means, it's meaningless. Thus, reality. Reality is a means for that intelligence to is a means for intelligence to experience through everything that it knows in billions of different... Just think about it in terms of humanity. There are billions of humans on the planet, and each one of them lives a different experience. If consciousness exists within each of those beings and experiences the rules that it knows outside of the entity of reality from a completely different perspective, then it gives all of those answers, all of that reality, meaning.
Even though it's probably the wrong thing to say, I think, well, I don't think I know. My headset just broke about 2 minutes into that. So I've just had to take my headset off and put you on speaker, but I have missed some of that. So I'm really sorry, listeners.
I'll give you the cliff notes. Let's do the cliff notes just to get you back up to speed.
Thank you.
So I did this because it's a really complex thing to explain. I prepared. So all existence, including life, humanity, and every form of reality, originates from a singular entity driven in a desire to experience. This entity exists beyond the bounds of reality as we know it, possessing complete knowledge and understanding. However, within this infinite knowledge, there's no questions. Only the curiosity of how these truths manifest and interrelate across countless scenarios. Consciousness, then, is the mechanism through which the entity explores those relationships, experiencing its knowledge in action across limitless spectrum of possibilities. Through this, existence itself becomes an act of exploration and understanding. That's
incredible.
Where I sit.
Oh, right. I'm going to need to try and just get my head around that. Give me a second.
Imagine there's an infinite library that contains every book ever written and every book that could ever be written. And inside this library, all the answers to every question exist. Now, here's the thing. Simply having the answers isn't the same as understanding what they mean.
Yes, well, absolutely. You've got there's a difference between teaching somebody the times tables and then having someone being able to actually, I don't know, you can teach a parrot to say a phrase, but they might not necessarily understand that. They might not understand what they're saying.
Yeah, they're just making the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. They wouldn't be able to write a Shakespearean play just because you taught them language.
Yeah, that's it.
So imagine that library that we were just talking about is alive, it's curious, and it wants to feel what it knows. It decides to write stories and step into them, becoming the characters, living through the plot and experiencing the emotions, challenges, and outcomes. In doing so, it transforms abstract knowledge into real lived experience.
That's interesting. So I'm just making sure I'm understanding you here, because I think that I might not be, although I will admit that was incredibly succinctly and eloquently put. But I'm just going to say what I think you're saying, and then hopefully either you can dumb it down or you can re-explain it, because I'm hoping that I'm not the only one, or the only one who's maybe misunderstanding you here. And simply, what I mean by that is, listeners, if you understood perfectly what Nick said the first time, then I apologize. Okay, so are you saying that reality is just the interface of consciousnesses interacting with each other, trying to gain a better understanding of their own being and of each other's being? Or no, there's more to it than that. There's not.
It's not. They're not they're only singular entities when they're able to observe each other in the means that you and I observe each other. However, outside of this reality, it's the same thing. Consciousness is the one thing. Like, let's think about it in terms of Christianity, right? God is, you get taught in Christianity that God is in everything.
To a point, yeah. It's not pure pantheism because he's also transcendent and exists outside of that reality.
Exactly. So, and it does. Yeah. Consciousness is existence. What wording did I use here? So back in the library, that's not empty just because you and I exist, because consciousness is experiencing through our reality. Like, the library's still open, yeah? And we take what experiences we've learned and go back to the library.
Yeah.
Yeah? When we die, we go back to being that one consciousness outside of, that one entity outside of reality. Yeah? But when we become you, me, the dog, whoever, whatever, it's a means for consciousness to experience some of the answers that it had back in the library from that perspective, giving the answers meaning.
Okay. Yeah, that's gone. This has gone a lot more metaphysical than
Well, this is the problem with why I can't necessarily like stop at any one faith, because I think there's truth in so much faith, and there's so much similarity between so many different faiths, and I'm not about to say I'm certainly not saying that any of them are wrong by any means. In fact, they're probably all right in their own way. But it's also the people that live outside of faith are also correct. And intelligence itself, design, whatever you want to call it, it's all relative. It doesn't matter. Oh mate, my brain is just completely falling out of my head.
No. This is what I was worried about. I think we've somewhat gotten in over our heads. But to be fair, I chose a difficult topic for a reason, because this is why it's good for us to be doing this podcast and good for us to be having these conversations, because they do try and stretch you.
Yeah.
Now this is the interesting thing, though, and I think this is why metaphysical views, like some of the ones that you've expressed, although if my terminology is wrong, I apologize, but this is why they go somewhat against science normally, is that because a lot of people believe truth, or abject truth and object truth. By abject, I mean absolute. By object, I mean by objective, and therefore what is real and what is definitive. A lot of people believe that to be singular, whereas the view that you express seems to be, from my experience and from my hearing at least, that what you're saying is simply that it's not, that truth is not that simple.
Yeah.
Or that reality is not that simple, which means I think we have gotten somewhat off topic, but I still believe that this is all great and this is all good content, because this is exactly the sort of thing that I wanted to be talking about with you in this podcast, because you do have to wonder, like, although something may objectively exist, but our subjective experience of each thing is going to be different. And it's difficult to say whose experience of that object is either more real and whose view of that object is more objective or true. I do believe in objectivity, and I do believe in the truth being somewhat singular, but what I will admit is that I know that that view in and of itself is derisive, and this is the real kicker is I also know that there's more to it than that. Like, what is, but at the same time, the how we all experience the what is coloured by our own consciousness. And I although in my case I know that undermines the objectivity, I can't see that being, or at least I very much hope it's not the same for everybody else, you know, or is it together as we view the objective and come to agreements on the objective? Do we become closer to truth simply by hearing and understanding the correlation, the colorations of other people's objective reality of truth, or of existence, I should say?
I think use the two-slit experiment for example here. I don't know if you've ever heard of what the I think they call it a double slit experiment.
Is it the whether electrons are a wave or a particle, and it's like
absolutely.
whether they're observed or whether they're being observed or not?
Yeah. So it's almost like you say it's correct. No matter the observer, you're right. Yeah, whether it be the electrical eye looking at it, and it's the electronic wave pattern that's being captured on the observation sheet at the back of the room, or whether it's the human eye that's looking at it and you're getting that sporadic random pattern that you'd expect to see from. So I want to bring people up to speed just so that they're aware of what the double slit experiment was. It was an experiment conducted by scientists where they fired electrons through two slits and then observed how that pattern presented on a readable sheet at the back of the room. And you'd expect if electrons are being fired randomly through two slits, that they would eventually form two lines, but that those lines would form in quite a random pattern, because based on what we think should be happening as humans. But what they found was, when they observed it through a camera, it displayed one pattern, like a wave pattern, against the wall. When it was observed by human eyes, it got that random pattern that you would expect to see from random exchange like that. And there was another circumstance as well, which I can't remember. When they didn't observe it at all, it just it did something else. I can't remember exactly. But it's almost like the electron was aware of what was watching it, even to the point where, and this is where it gets really messed up, because what they did was they changed the observer halfway through the test to see if, as the particles were traveling through the air, whether or not they'd see the end of one pattern and the start of the next one. But what had happened was it switched instantly. So even the particles that had travelled through the slit already seemed to go back in time and change their pattern based on what was observing their impact. So, as I said, it's basically like saying Is intelligent design a thing? Well, yes. But is intelligent design not a thing? Well, yes. In the same, it's like Schrodinger's cat, right? Like a superposition.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think that's where you'll always get to in any kind of argument like that. Is there's so many? It's such a superposition to be in, because it's completely dependent on the observer.
Yeah. Okay, and like literally, although it's interesting though that we talk about the difference of things being observed. I know that the calculations of the early Big Bang require there to be a observer of some kind in order for things to have worked out as they do. But then again, I haven't done my research freshly enough into that in order to quote a direct source, which is annoying. But I understand what you're saying is that people will observe the same. Well, one angle of what you're saying. There's multiple angles of what
Yeah,
you're saying here, although I'm not going to pretend to have grasped all of them. One of the ones that I have grasped is that people will observe the same thing and see, and what they will interpret is what they want to see, but also what is there is in some ways is changed by their interpretation.
yes,
But to a point at least.
yeah. Like it fits the pattern that they expect to see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is where I was going with that double slit experiment analogy. Was that it caters for what's observing it and what the expectation is. And like if you think about the Big Bang, they're basing their calculations off of regressing calculations that they've made within the known universe, right?
Yeah.
So they make observations on how things are moving and how they're rotating and what speed they're traveling and how fast they're slowing down and things like that. And if they're speeding at X, Y, Z, and then they reverse it. They go backwards. And they go, well, if we go back far enough, then everything comes out of this one point. And that's how they came up with the concept of the Big Bang. But what's to say there was nothing that intervened throughout that process that changed the pattern? There's no way to know, is there? So all that you've really got is a theoretical circumstance.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I think it's frustrating that for me, you can look at 1,000,001 facts in science, but when it does come to intelligent design or not, it for me is more of a philosophical thing. But what annoys me is that from both sides of the argument simply accuse the other of pseudoscience, or of bad science. And this frustrates me because I'm too definite in my words and thinking processes, which is weird because that's a complete juxtaposition of how I feel, which is a mess of all things all the time. But like, I prefer it when it's like one person being right and one person being wrong, and not both people having legitimate criticism of the other one's methodology, but the fact that both arguments' criticism of the other one appear from an outsider's point of view to be true simply means that once again I'm left in a place of confusion and somewhat agnosticism, in that both sides of the argument seem to somewhat be true. Like, just to go back to intelligent design quickly, one of its you know what, like, this is the thing as well, because I think it's a way of thinking that I think it is adopted by a lot more people than its criticizers would want to admit, and a lot less people than its proponents would want to say. Like, I think it's one of those things where there seems to be a massive grey area of it, but intelligent design has a organization behind it which is kind of pushing some of it forward, which is the Center for Science and Culture, which is part of the Discovery Institute and is set in Seattle in Washington. A major proponent of it is a gentleman called, Dr. Jonathan Wells. I say that the reason why I include doctor in his title is because he has 2 PhDs, and he is both a genuine religious person and a genuine scientist. Doesn't necessarily mean everything that he says is correct, but it's not like he's just a know-nothing who's coming out of this with an agenda. And it's just it's frustrating that when I look a little bit at so Jonathan Wells, there's an interview in the book that I read. There's an interview between Lee Strobel and Jonathan Wells, and some of the things that Jonathan Wells says are entirely valid when it comes to what makes good science and what doesn't, and having a premise or a a hypothesis which doesn't, or saying that a hypothesis requires no proof is bad science, and therefore some of the elements of some of the stuff that is put forward in evolution is bad science. But then it's interesting that some of the scientists that he quotes in his own work, which was called Icons of Evolution, we'll probably do an episode on this at a later point. But a number of scientists who were included in that work have come forward and said, look, you've misquoted us. It's annoying to me that so much of this seems messy, and it frustrates me that when I have spoken to some real scientists, some of them have seen intelligent design as valid, and some of them have seen it as absolutely preposterous. And it's difficult for me to know which way the coin falls, you know?
Yeah. I mean, Elon Musk has a theory that we are either in a simulation or we are going to create a simulation that will be almost indistinguishable from our reality, and therefore we basically create essentially what he theorizes is that life creates. So you think about yourself as if you think about your life as the main character in a computer game, and the world that you live in is the platform in which you're playing your video game, right? And then within that, you're going to, like, real humans will eventually create artificial intelligence within a computer in its own observable universe, and that will develop its own intelligence over time and eventually create its own intelligence within that dimension. And he speculates that there's probably more of an 80% chance that we are in a simulation of sorts, rather than 20%, and around 20% chance that we're actually living a physical reality, which I think is a really twisted thing, but it also shows the level of complexity in the way that people think about intelligent design.
Mm.
So have you heard much of the simulation theory?
No. Yeah, please. Elaborate a little bit for me there.
I think simulation theory is exactly what I just explained. It's you're essentially in the Matrix, and as laughable as that might sound, it feeds into that kind of intelligent design mentality because everything is so perfect, and everything's so consistent and yet perfectly inconsistent at the same time. Does that make sense? And intelligence is allowed to develop in the way that we have. And now, if you think about the fact that we are creating intelligence in the way that we are, we're at the point where we can essentially create an intelligence that will eventually one day be smarter than us. It almost justifies the theory. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you could create another simulation theory within the simulation theory, the inception of simulation theories.
Aye. Okay. Yeah. No, I see that. Yeah, that's interesting as well. That some people look at the fine-tunedness of nature and go that a god must exist, and some people look at the fine-tunedness of nature and go, well, this can't be real.
Yeah.
And therefore must be a simulation.
If it's a simulation, real and unreal is like relative. So I don't think he'd necessarily say that it was unreal. But simulative.
Yeah, sorry, that was an oversimplification on my part.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Not material would probably be. Then how far back would you have to go? I'm reminded of an episode of Black Mirror. Have you ever seen Black Mirror?
I've seen a couple of episodes. I will not pretend to say that I've seen all of them.
Have you seen Joan is Awful?
No, what happens in that episode?
So in this episode, Joan goes to work, has a horrible day, sees her ex-boyfriend, ends up kissing him, goes home to her fiancé, sits down after stressing about how terrible her day was, turns on Streamberry, which is like the Black Mirror version of Netflix, and the TV show Joan is Awful is on Streamberry, and she watches the episode, and it's her day played out again on TV, and she's like, what is this? How has this happened? Like, why is my life being shown on there? And causes all kinds of crazy drama, and she ends up losing her job because of it. She ends up going completely like bonkers because Streamberry is playing her life like it's a TV show. But then the more you go into it, you find out that actually it's all AI written, and she's actually the third inception of the real Joan, whose life has been written by Streamberry, because obviously Joan originally, the original Joan, has this happen, and Streamberry uses AI to create this TV show. But then within that Stream TV show reality, there's also a TV show of Joan and how Joan interacts with that TV show, and within it, so on and so forth, yeah. And she's the one that we're actually watching is like the third inception of that, and there's like further with different celebrities. It's hilarious. It's a really twisted way of looking at it, but it if nothing else, it told me always read the small print. But it really gets your head ticking as well, which I think absolutely what the writer, I forget his name now, of Black Mirror was going for. My God, that guy's a genius.
Is it Charlie Brooker?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the
Or
one.
do they have multiple? Aren't there multiple writers?
Yeah, no, mainly it's Charlie Brooker though, isn't it? It's his baby. But yeah, I mean it's hilarious. But that's a good representation of simulation theory. You get the chance to watch it. Watch it. It's a great episode. She goes nuts.
Yeah,
She smashes
Charlton,
stuff up as well.
Charlton Brooker.
Yeah, Charlton Brooker.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, I think we've covered a good amount of philosophy, a good amount of our own views. Yeah, thank you very much for listening, listeners. We'll try and we'll come back to some of these points at another time.
Maybe we'll cover a slightly lighter topic in the next one.
Yeah. You know what? Yes, but I think it's good to do a heavy one every once in a while.
Absolutely.
And I reckon we will come back to this.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed that. Sorry for every glazed eye and every far look and distant haze that came over people's faces whilst I was talking. It's why I don't generally discuss my beliefs, but that's how I feel, and everybody's valid to feel however they want, which is what we always say in these podcasts. You had a little taste of mine. Feel free to share yours. Remember, there's a Reddit. You can share your perspectives on there. They would have been voiced at the beginning of the podcast, so feel free to go there and give your perspective.
All right. Thanks again, listeners. Have a good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.